Well, hello, my name is Brian Mefford. I'm an independent business and political consultant based in Kyiv, Ukraine. I've lived and worked in Kyiv for 17 years, formerly with the International Republican Institute. I worked for President Lutsenko at one point, and in the last few years I do consulting work on a lot of U.S. government and European Union projects, as well as I have a hobby of writing a blog about Ukrainian politics. So, very fortunate the blog gets picked up by the Kyiv Post, by now with YouTube. Very pleased to be on the program today. I'm a senior non-resident fellow at the Atlantic Council, which, as you know, has played an important role in supporting Ukraine in these recent years. So that's a little bit about my background. This week's blog post was entitled Yatseniuk's Day of Execution. Of course, it's allegory for the fact that he survived his no confidence vote. And I'll go into more details, but there were two key events this week. Number one, the president called for the resignation of the prosecutor general and the prime minister. That's significant because up until now he had been steadfastly backing the prosecutor, even in spite of a lot of Western criticism from Canada, from the U.S., from the EU, and so forth. That was the first part. The second part, calling for the resignation of the prime minister. Now, Yatseniuk's been the prime minister since essentially Euromaidan, so he has been in the job now 2 full years. Both moves a little bit surprising, but in the end, Parliament had to approve it. So what happened was, with regard to a no confidence vote in the cabinet, they did a little bit of sleight of hand. They had 2 votes. They had the first vote with 247 deputies, 226 is needed. 247 basically said, we don't approve of the work of the government. So it's a slap on the wrist, but we're not going to fire you. And then on the second vote, regarding the prime minister, 194 deputies voted to dismiss the cabinet. And this is very significant, because I'll come back to this. So even though everyone talks about, well, Yatseniuk survived with 194, it was actually the cabinet. So the first 247 said, you're doing a bad job, and 194 said, you're actually doing such a bad job, we're going to fire you. And we'll come back to that in just a minute. Now, regarding the prosecutor general, you're familiar with the old move from Soviet times. You don't fire people, you go on sick leave. And so it was announced that he was on sick leave. Now, admittedly, it's no secret that the prosecutor general is battling cancer. So it put the media and critics of that in a difficult position, because you don't want to kick a guy with cancer. On the other hand, for lack of a better way of putting it, the guy is a cancer on the presidency. He's a cancer on reform in Ukraine, and that the resignation is now official. So that at least is finally done, and now we can move forward with the new prosecutor general. We can talk about some potential replacements later. Ambassador Geoffrey Pyatt, the U.S. ambassador, came out yesterday praising the move, calling it a courageous move on behalf of the president. And the reality is the judiciary and the legal system has really prevented, or has been a bottleneck, let's put it that way, on the prosecution of Yanukovych-era crimes as well as reform. And so, we're all hoping that the new prosecutor will be able to make some inroads and really reform the judiciary. We'll set up a legitimate, criminal prosecution system that goes after criminals. A system where not everyone is a criminal under the law, and they only go after the criminals, and you get rid of selectively motivated political cases. So that's the goal. It's a big task. And then, of course, regarding the prime minister. So now we have a situation where, as with everything in Ukraine, there's the official version and there's the unofficial. There's about 3 or 4 unofficial versions. So the official version is the cabinet can stay now until the end of this session. Now, the session of Parliament there's convocations of Parliament, which is whenever you elect a Parliament, that convocation continues until the next election. And then there's sessions within the convocations. So in the U.S., for example, the session of Congress runs from January till about November, whenever they get a budget passed. So it can run to the end of the year, which typically does now, but it's January through December. Here, those sessions of Parliament are done differently, so they're more arbitrary. Traditionally, if you look at from 1991 forward, each session of Parliament runs about 6 months. So they've already decided that this session that started on February 1st will go to the end of July, July 22nd. So technically, there can be no votes to dismiss the cabinet until after this session's over on July 22nd. When's the next session start? Probably the end of August, at the latest, early September. So that's the official version. However, there are three mechanisms whereby the Prime Minister could still be removed and potentially new elections called. The first one, Yuriy Lutsenko, the Poroshenko faction leader, basically attacked Yatseniuk on Wednesday, saying, fall on the sword. You failed. You need to get out of the way and resign. That's the be a man and resign kind of speech. And that could certainly happen. There are people who are pushing for the Prime Minister to resign or to make his job difficult enough that he just throws in the towel. That could happen. It could also happen in a situation where, if Yatseniuk's frustrated, he finds a victory on some piece of legislation that's important, and he says, okay, now my job is done, I'm resigning on my terms. That's a distinct possibility. On the other hand, it's just 5 more months, so probably he would be able to write that up. The second situation, also on Wednesday, Yuriy Tymoshenko met with President Poroshenko. Now, these two have been opponents for a long time, going back to 2005. But politics make strange bedfellows, and so there's very few real friends or enemies. Everything seems to be very situational. And Tymoshenko had a conversation with the president about specifically dismissing Yatseniuk. So you had the vote of 194 deputies to dismiss the cabinet as a whole, but you can also dismiss individual members. And so this nuance in the law is what she's going after. So she wants to hold this kind of sword of Damocles over the Prime Minister's head and maybe push for a no confidence vote on Yatseniuk. Now, if you look at the numbers, and certainly what I put in the blog, the numbers are there, and I think they have been there maybe even since November to dismiss the Prime Minister. The reason they haven't been successful in that is that then the question becomes who's next. So we all agree the guy needs to go, but we can't agree on the replacement, and therein lies a big part of the problem. If Tymoshenko pushes this no confidence vote in the Prime Minister, he could be sacked. She did push through a no confidence vote. Interestingly enough, there's a precedent for it. After she was fired by Yushchenko in September 2005, she pushed a no confidence vote in Yuriy who took her place as Prime Minister. And so just a few months into Yekanorov's brief stint as Prime Minister, he already had the no confidence vote. So he became an acting Prime Minister at that point, but it was clear that he wasn't going to be able to get anything done. So there is that precedent going back to Yakanurov in 2005, 2006. And then the third possibility that could take place is the possibility that the parliamentary coalition will fall apart. Now, at the moment, you have Poroshenko's Solidarity, and then you have People's Front, which is Yatseniuk. Of course, those two don't really like each other right now a whole lot, but that's the coalition. So that's the key part of the coalition. Samopomich, the third biggest part of the coalition, they withdrew on Thursday or Friday from the coalition. So that was a big blow to the coalition. That takes out 26 votes and technically puts the coalition just now Yatseniuk at 217 votes. They're 9 votes short of a majority. Now they could, bring in some independents. Already there are talks with Radical Party. Oleh Lyashko is now making noise about returning possibly to the coalition. A lot of people believe that the Radical Party is financed by Dmytro Firtash, the oligarch. Interestingly enough, in November, there was a leading indicator that there might be some resolution between Firtash and this government because on 2 fertilizer factories in Cherkasy and Rivne, all of a sudden, Firtash had shut down the factory and said, I'm not going to pay the taxes. And all of a sudden, the factories start back up and he's paying the taxes again. So it's money in the state budget, which is very important. It makes the law equal for everyone. No one has to pay taxes. So the fact that he started paying taxes on these two factories was obviously not from the goodness of his heart. It looks like that might have been the leading indicator of some mending offenses between Firtash and his government. He's got his suite in Vienna, nice hotel there, and people come and pay homage and negotiate their deals politically in business and otherwise. He's wanted to come back to Ukraine. Interestingly enough, and this is where it's so complicated, Arsen Avakov, who's the interior minister, said, the moment he comes back, we're going to arrest him. It's very, very complicated because if the Radical Party comes back into the coalition, presumably that would not just be a political agreement. Somehow that would probably pave the way for Firtash to return to Ukraine. So that's very interesting. That would bring 21 votes into the coalition, put the coalition size at 238 deputies, so 12 more than the minimum. Not great, but adequate enough to pass simple legislation. Now, Lyashko has made also rumblings about what do they want. I mean, they're not doing it from the goodness of their hearts either. So, in addition to whatever agenda Mr. Firtash might have, one of the things that has been thrown out, a trial balloon, is to replace Mr. Grossen as Speaker and make Mr. Lyashko the Speaker of Parliament. That may be more bluff than bite, but at this point, the President and Prime Minister, they need those 21 votes in the Radical Party. So last time, the Radical Party just had one member of the cabinet. It was a Vice Premier Minister position. And Mr. Oleh, who resigned in September, and that post has not been filled. It's doubtful, though, that would be adequate enough to entice him back. If it wasn't good enough to keep him there, it's not going to be good enough to entice him back. So we're going to have to raise the stakes and what they offer. So hence the trial balloon about Oleh Lyashko becoming the Speaker. So that's a quick rundown of things. Now, if in the event that, let's say, Radical Party doesn't join the coalition and the President and Prime Minister can't get any independents to join within 30 days so that March 19th approximately, just after St. Patrick's Day. So if they don't get those votes together, 226 votes together by St. Patrick's Day, essentially, what happens under the law is that the President then has the right, not the obligation, but has the right to dismiss Parliament. And he's got a 60-day window in which he could dismiss Parliament. Obviously, this takes us back to 2007 with Yushchenko dismissing Parliament to prevent party regions takeover at that time and new elections, which temporarily reset things. So we're very close to new elections, which is not a good thing. Free, fair, democratic elections are a good thing, but you also got to let people do their job. Having perpetual elections does not benefit Ukraine at this time, and that was certainly the message that U.S. Vice President Joe Biden delivered when he came into Kyiv in December. And de facto, that was, look, you guys can choose any prime minister you want, but no new elections. Read my lips, no new elections. So that's the key message from the U.S. and obviously I think Canada and the EU are in agreement that Ukraine's government needs time to get things done and not just be in a perpetual state of campaigning with the voters. Investment is attracted by stability and a set playing field. So you can tweak the tax rate from 19 to 20, but you got to have a basic framework, and the fact that the government's now, at a minimum, is going to be reshuffled. Potentially, we have new elections, as Brimmer's pointed out. Those elections, by the way, could be as early as if we go the route that the president has to dismiss. Those elections could take place somewhere as early as May, maybe July. If, however, Yatseniuk rides it out, they reform a majority, and he rides it out till, say, early September, and he's dismissed then. At that point, you could also be looking at December elections, so almost Christmas Day, Western Christmas elections. So those are a couple of different scenarios, none of which are particularly good for Ukraine. at this time. Regarding the cabinet, yes, absolutely. There's going to be a reshuffle, and the question is who does what. So at the moment, the prime minister stays on the job. Ministers like Pivovarsky at infrastructure, Pavlenko in the agrarian ministry, certainly Natalie Yatseniuk at finance, they all get high marks. In fact, the president praised all those ministers, as well as the energy minister, Dmytro, who is one of Yatseniuk's most frequent targets of criticism, but apparently they've made peace recently too. So, but the president praised a number of ministers, Yatseniuk, Dmytro, Pavlenko at agrarian, and Pivovarsky at infrastructure. So if those ministers want to stay on, obviously those posts are safe. Where could the changes come in? Possibly to health ministry. Mr. Kvitashvili, one of the Georgians that's joined the government, is there, although he lacks the support of, he has the support of the prime minister, who Saakashvili doesn't like, but he doesn't have the support of Saakashvili and the president, so he would probably be one of the expendable posts. You could also see some other, they need to replace the ecology minister, since Igor Shevchenko departed in June of last year. That post has been empty. There's still no first vice prime minister, and that's kind of one of the key posts in contention. There's a couple different scenarios, because the first vice prime minister, if the prime minister resigned, would actually take over as the acting prime minister until there was a proper vote by parliament. So in fact, whoever becomes first vice prime minister could be the next prime minister. So who's in line for that? First of all, there's probably three main candidates at this point. There is Boris Lyashko, who's the president's chief of staff. He wants the post. He's proven himself largely effective in terms of getting things done for the president. He's a bit of a question mark, and he's been linked to some there's been discussion of corruption without actual allegations, but typically in Ukraine where there's smoke, there's fire. So it's not clear if he would get the first deputy post or not. Now, there's obviously talk about Natalie Yatseniuk maybe moving in as first deputy prime minister, as well as keeping the finance portfolio. That could be a good variant. The question is, is she ready to take on the additional responsibilities? She's been very careful not to express any interest in the prime minister's office. I mean, when asked about it, or prime minister's post for herself, she's been very supportive of Yatseniuk and the government, saying we need just what we need are good principles and not worry about the personalities. So definitely, she's on message. Would she actually take the post? So far, she's saying no. We'll see if that's the case. If Ukraine's in a crisis, she might be persuaded, and making her first deputy prime minister might be the prime minister's way of grooming her for the position down the road. So we'll see what happens there. And of course, the person who openly is wanting the post, although I think he'd actually prefer the prime minister's post. But if he has to settle for first deputy for now, it'll be fine. It's Odessa governor and former Georgian president Misha Saakashvili. So Saakashvili definitely sees his future in Kyiv, not in Odessa. He, in terms of saying the right things, he's definitely saying all the right things. He's, with the exception maybe of Andrei Sadovyi, the Lviv mayor, he's got the highest positive ratings of any politician, more than the president, more than the prime minister for sure. And he's well known. He's a well-known commodity with a record of achievement in Georgia. So, he's interested in the post. So far, he's been brushed back a little bit by the West. I think he was hoping that the West would maybe push him and promote him for that post, and they've not done that so far. He was actually in Washington this week, so his presence in Washington suggests that no decisions are going to be made right away. I don't always agree with Ross, but he's often right. There's two things. I think one, I think there is the resignation of Shokin helps. It should have been done 6 months ago. I mean, okay, better late than never. So could the new guy come in, whether it's Costco, who just quit, the deputy prosecutor, or David Saakashvili, who was part of Saakashvili's team. Could one of those guys come in? Yeah, possibly. Maybe they could shake things up and get things done. That's possible. There's been some talk even about Vitaly Yerema, who was prosecutor before Shokin, maybe coming back to the post. Nobody really knows at the moment who's going to take that post. But whoever it is has to really come in there and just fix the system. The system, it's a bottleneck. Prosecutions get clogged. Rich guys get protected. Criminals go free. So this broken system has to somehow, get fixed. It may not be a fundamental fix yet, but at least show some improvement. I always use the example of you got a car broken down on the side of the highway. All you need to do is you just get it working, get a little bit of gas in it, just fiddle under the hood, get it to the next gas station, just get it off the highway. And that's what Ukraine needs to do with the prosecutor's office. They need to get this broken legal system just off the side of the highway, get it to a gas station, temporary fix, and then let's get up under the hood and do some fundamental changes so that we can go the distance here. I'm a believer in free markets, and I think that especially for a country with a communist legacy, you're going to have to take the handcuffs off for a while. Now later, we see some abuses. We can start to regulate different areas. But Poland's shock therapy in the early 90s, I think, is a good example. And I use Poland specifically because the Baltics are great and they have great experience. But it's much easier to change Lithuania with 4 million people than it is to change Ukraine with 43 million people now. Exactly. He's doing some consulting for the government from time to time, and I think he may even be one of the members of this reforms council that Saakashvili was heading at one point. Of course, that seems to be dormant at the moment. Yeah, he would definitely be the kind of person that, come in and diagnose, okay, you need to do A, B, and C. We need to do a little shock therapy. And I mean, that's always the problem and one of the reasons why Ukraine hasn't reformed yet. Why? Because if you're constantly doing elections, you can't do the shock therapy. The patient's going to have to get a little bit worse before he gets better. So he's going to have to sweat it out and take the castor oil and the bad medicine, but he's going to get better. But in the meantime, if you have an election, you're going to get crucified if you're the guy who does the shock therapy. So that's why, elections, number one, are a bad idea. Early elections are a bad idea. And number two, this government needs to find a way to make things work, instead of constantly recycling and resetting the system. Ukraine has gone through 2 transformational Maidans. And as we look back historically, what was the Orange Revolution about? And in my opinion, I see the Orange Revolution as Ukraine making a choice to be an independent Ukraine. Yeah, there was a vote in 1991 and we're independent, but there was also a vote in Turkmenistan. There was a vote in, all these other former Soviet republics. But the Orange Revolution was about Ukraine establishing firmly and saying, we are Ukrainian, we are separate from Russia. We'll be friends with Russia, we'll trade with Russia. That was what they were saying at the time. Now it's a different situation. But, we can have friendly relations with them, but we are separate. I don't want to live with my big brother anymore. I want to have my own house and do my own thing. That was very important. Euromaidan, the second Maidan, was about Ukraine saying, not only are we Ukrainian, we established that 10 years ago, we are European. We're not Eurasian, we're not Asian. Our civilization choice is Europe. We want to return to where we have been historically in the past and as a part of Europe. So along with that, one of the reasons why the Orange Revolution was not more successful, the infighting was a key part, obviously, but and we're seeing, unfortunately, that starting again. But one of the key differences was in 2005, there just wasn't a great cadre of people with experience in government and maybe the private sector who had made their money honestly, and that was unfortunate. So you just had some of the same old apparatchiks who have to switch sides at the right time, joining the government, and then getting back into their corrupt schemes. With Euromaidan, one of the key differences was that the activists, the NGO activists, were the key locomotive of Euromaidan, whereas the Orange Revolution was more about the campaign of Yushchenko and his political team at the time. So it was more of a political movement than a civil society movement, although there were factors of both in each. But the difference with Euromaidan is it was more civil society driven and less by the political parties. So with that in mind, that's hope that's grounds for hope, because those civil society activists are still active and they're still actually giving the government a pretty hard time about their lack of reform. And the economy's in a recession, but eventually it's gonna pull out. Maybe even this year have a little bit of growth. As the economy grows, you'll continue to create a small but important middle class, mostly in Kyiv. But that's important because they influence things. It creates a great cadre from which the government can draw. Maybe people who have studied abroad, Western educations or worked abroad for a while, but they've come back to Ukraine to live in their homeland and to make their country a better place. But it's there is a generation thing. I mean, that there's definitely a difference between those under 45 and those over 45. So there is hope with the younger generation that the country can, join the European Union in their lifetimes, and people can have a decent standard of living. What the judges in Ukraine need, the trips to North America, Canada, Ottawa, Washington, they're helpful. But to fundamentally change things, what you've got to do is you got to change the system. I mean, the system is broken, and it's a legacy of the Soviet Union. The '96 Constitution. The '96 Constitution works technically, but after the Orange Revolution, not a single high-profile prosecution of crimes under the previous regime. Same thing again. Everyone runs away to Russia and they don't extradite, but at some point you got to be able to put the bandits in prison, and the system blocks that. Admittedly, it's not just that they're not trying. Partly that. I mean, there's partly corruption in the prosecution system, but the system itself doesn't facilitate itself to punishing wrongdoers appropriately enough. So my recommendation is that maybe you bring these North American judges and some Europeans, but you bring them in as advisors to a constitutional convention. I mean, that may be the answer, because I think the system is what really needs to be fixed here. Not so much the training. The judges are competent and smart in Ukraine, sometimes wickedly smart, with evil intents. But the bigger system, the bigger problem is changing the system. Three quick things come to mind. Number one, you get a prosecutor who's really going to, be a prosecutor. He's going to prosecute criminals and he's going to protect innocent citizens. That's number one. So the next prosecutor has to be someone who's really going to tackle that seriously. Number two, the president is also along those lines, and what we just talked about. The president has proposed making judicial reform a big issue, and I would just punch the gas on that. I would accelerate it. One of the problem is yes, there was a war, and there's still fighting going on in the East, but it's not an excuse not to change. I always use the example of Abraham Lincoln in the American Civil War. He didn't say, "Hey, listen, guys, we want to free the slaves, but we won't wait till after the war." He said, "No, now's the time of change. Everything I'm going to do is going to be unpopular anyway, so let me do it now and take the political hit so that we can get the benefits as a nation." When the economy's good and everyone's salary's growing, nobody wants to change. Everyone just incrementally. The time for radical change is times of war and recessions.